Hello, my name is Libby Oliver, and I studied the effects of a PBIS token behavior system on and off-task behavior displayed by special education students with behavioral and emotional disorders in 1st and 3rd grade. I am currently a graduate student at Morningside College. I have a bachelor's degree in elementary education at the University of Iowa. And I currently work at West Liberty Elementary School. At West Liberty, I teach special education behavior focus for grades 1st through 6th and special education resource for grades 1st and 2nd. According to Kramer, Davies, Arndt, and Hunley, off-task behavior influences student low achievement and test scores negatively. Their study found that off-task behavior impacts the learning process by reducing instructional time due to addressing the problem behaviors. Kozowicz, Rule, and Kubana found that off-task behavior is often correlated with students who have emotional and behavioral disorders. As I just previously stated, it has been found that many students with emotional and behavioral disorders display off-task behavior, and when off-task behavior increases, students suffer negatively academically. Therefore, I chose this topic of research because I am currently teaching a behavior-focused classroom, and many of my students have off-task behavior in the general education classroom. I wanted to see if a classroom score would decrease the off-task behavior displayed by my students. Off-task behaviors are related to student underachievement. Students with emotional and behavioral disorders often show off-task behaviors. According to Hawkins and Axelrod and Kozowicz, Rule, and Kubana, they found that students with emotional and behavioral disorders tend to show off-task behaviors in order to avoid something as well as other reasons. According to Kramer, Davies, Arndt, and Hunley, and Sutherland, Lewis, Palmer, Strichter, and Morgan, off-task behavior makes it difficult for the student to succeed academically. Negative reinforcement occurs when something already present is removed or taken away as a result of a person's behavior, creating a favorable outcome for that person. Basically, when a person's behavior leads to the removal of something that was unpleasant to that person, then negative reinforcement is occurring. Punishment is when a teacher intentionally does something to make a student feel guilty, humiliated, or fearful in an attempt to get them to change their behavior. For example, if a student doesn't finish their homework, their teacher may have them stay in for recess. These techniques are ineffective when addressing off-task behavior and can lead to negative teacher-student relationships. Positive reinforcement refers to the increase or probability of a response that is followed by a favorable consequence. For example, for a student who wants attention, a teacher may give the student high verbal praise after the student completes his work. This verbal praise would then reinforce the student to complete his work again in order to receive more verbal praise. According to a study done in 2013, 2 boys who had IEPs for behavioral and academic goals both increased their on-task behavior with positive reinforcement in the form of a token economy system, which is the same type of positive reinforcement studied in this research. One of the 2 boys increased his on-task behavior by 52%, according to Jones, Weber, and McLaughlin. The goal of PBIS is to improve student behavioral outcomes by providing students with clear behavioral expectations, creating safe environments, and explicitly teaching, monitoring, and reinforcing identified behaviors in a culturally and contextually relevant manner. When PBIS system was implemented in a group of preschoolers, the students showed a significant decrease in off-task behaviors, according to Stanton, Chapton, Walker, Vahoris, and Snell. Behaviorism theory believes that positive reinforcement increases the probability that the antecedent behavior will happen again. Skinner's work suggests that when you use operant conditioning by presenting a reinforcing stimulus to a voluntary response, that the response will be more likely to occur. Positive reinforcement, when implemented correctly, can be more effective to promote on-task behavior than other behavior modification strategies, according to Berner, Simpson, and Rose. A behavioral scientist by the name of B.F. Skinner wanted to demonstrate the idea of operant conditioning by creating an experiment called the Skinner box, which I have pictured on this slide. Skinner created a box with a button where if a rat pushed it, he could get food. Using operant conditioning, Skinner was able to teach the rats to push the button in order to receive a positive response. The purpose of the study was to determine the impact of a token positive reinforcement intervention system on elementary students with emotional and behavioral disorders. The tool used in this study was a classroom store positive reinforcement system where students can earn tickets when following expectations at school. The student can then exchange the tickets for desired items. What items are desired was determined by a preference assessment given to each student. The measurement device used in the study was a pen and paper recording sheet used by the observer to record data of the student's on and off task behavior in the general education classroom during math or literacy independent work time. My hypothesis was that the positive reinforcement in the form of a classroom store would decrease off-task behavior in the classroom and increase on-task behavior during independent math and reading work time. The independent variable was the token system, which we reward students in the form of tickets in using a classroom store where students can exchange their tickets for things. The dependent variable was the amount of on-task and off-task behavior displayed by the participants. The results of this study can be used to help teachers make decisions about how to decrease off-task behavior in students during independent math or reading work time. This study could provide evidence of a successful behavior interventions for teachers to refer to in the future. My work as a practitioner will be impacted by whether or not I continue to use the token positive behavior system in an intervention and how I select other behavior interventions in the future. The participants in my study were 3 special education students in a behavioral and emotional disorder classroom. The first student was a first grade student with low SES and of African American descent. The second student was a first grade student with low SES and Caucasian descent. And the third student was a third grade student with high SES and Hispanic descent. The materials used in the study, there were posters stating expectations posted around the classroom and school. These posters showed the school expectation in writing as well in picture form. A recording sheet for on and off task behavior was used to record data for the study. This recording sheet is displayed on the screen. The teacher records a plus or minus sign on the minute of that student is displaying on or off task behavior as the clock changes to that minute. The observer had to have access to a clock with a second hand or a stopwatch when recording. There was a preference survey given to each student in order to know what to purchase for the store. For this preference survey, students chose which item they would prefer to earn out of 2 items presented by the teacher. The student repeated this until they had chosen between multiple items. The store had a list of the price for each item in the form of a number of tickets. The store contained desired items, tickets that were given to the students for on-task behavior. The procedure for this experiment was during the study, tickets were given to the students approximately every 5 minutes when the students were displaying on-task behavior throughout the school day, including during independent literacy and math time. The teacher recorded data for 15 minutes in the general education classroom during independent reading or math time once per day. Students have 10 minutes in the end of each school day to purchase desired items with their tickets that they earned. Students can choose to not purchase anything and save the tickets if they would like. During the study, the progress was monitored daily and graphed by students on graph paper during social skills time. Data was analyzed at the conclusion of the 8-week intervention. There was not a statistically significant increase in student on-task behavior as the result of the token positive behavior system store. Even though all students showed growth in their percent of on-task behavior, it was not enough to be statistically significant. The initial mean percentage score for all 3 students was 78.33% of time spent on task. The mean score percentage of the weeks the token system was in place was 85% of the time spent on task. The mean grew by more than 6 percentage points. The figure shown on the slide is showing the percent of time the students were on task during observations in literacy and math independent work time. The lighter bars are the student percent of on-task behavior before the classroom store is implemented, and the darker bars are the student percentage of on-task behavior after the classroom store is implemented. As you can see, all 3 students increased their amount of on-task behavior displayed. This research reinforced the importance of rewarding students for positive actions in the classroom. The data showed that all the students increased their on-task behavior after the classroom store was implemented. This behavior intervention could be a good tool for educators to use in a behavior-focused classroom. This behavior intervention can benefit students' education by increasing their on-task behavior in the classroom. Some limitations of the study were lack of funds for items in the store. The school will not supply these items, so the teacher has to supply them. High desired items can be expensive. For example, many students were interested in electronics, video games, and larger items. To help this, the teacher can only present certain items in the preference survey that work with their budget. The sample size was only 3 students, and because of the small sample size, there was a small range of grades and ages. Additional students will yield additional research data. Items weren't motivating enough, primarily because of limited funding discussed earlier, and preference assessments need to be given often. External influences on behavior. Some examples of external influences that could affect the student behavior at school are negative home interactions, medication problems, peer influences, student triggers, and availability of desired store items. Some recommendations for future studies are continued research to strengthen and validate the findings, continued research with larger sample size, use of different research-based behavior intervention strategies, continued research on the impact of the token system with all ages, research on how to best fund the store, research on system with different kinds of behaviors, and research on preference assessments, which assessments are the best to use for which students. This is a page of my references that I used for this presentation. Thank you for listening.